self-described nonprofit consultant, media correspondent, book publisher, and lover of poetry. Antoinette is co-author of the book Modern Media Relations for Nonprofits. And she has most recently added co-founder of Davidson Local to her resume. Antoinette is also a 1996 graduate of Lexington High School. Woo! Impressive. Welcome, Antoinette. We are so excited to have you here with us. So you have recently co-founded Davidson Local. Can you tell us a little bit about what Davidson Local is or is not and how folks can subscribe?
Okay, well, Davidson Local is a new publication for Davidson County, started by two hometown gals, me and Cassandra Lockhart. We have been in the newspaper industry, and I normally show my 1995 headshot from the For Youth Only page. I also was editor of the Lexapep way back in the day. Most people don't believe that. But we both have been in the newspaper industry for over 20 years. So we've been through a lot of transitions. For some of you don't know, probably 5 different local newspaper sales. And then also we've freelanced for a lot of people. And what we realized is missing is hyper local news. So we partnered with Magic Mom Media, and we started and formed a local newspaper called DavidsonLocal.com. And if you go to it, it is free, which is one thing we were really passionate about. We really wanted folks to be able to have access to information. And so you won't find any pop-up ads. You can subscribe to Davidson Local for free. And I love our subscribers because right now we're 1,200 people strong that want us to come into their inbox every day and every morning. And I don't know if you're subscribed, but it comes around 7. So you can have it with your coffee. And we also post news throughout the day. So what you won't receive, you won't have any national news, any national politics. I hate to disappoint those of you who are looking for that in Davidson Local. But we are basically here to talk about, things like what's happening at the library, which is how you and I connected.
That's right.
So that was really an amazing connection for us and something that we can give time and energy to. So you can expect really local things, pitch stuff to us, and definitely subscribe. Right now, the analytics are showing that in 3 months, we've been in existence 3 months on the 5th coming up. And since we've been in existence, we have had over 31,000 unique visitors. That means 31,000 different people came to our website to learn about local news. So we've been loving the community embrace.
What I love about Davidson Local compared to some of the other e-newspapers that I subscribe to is that it's 5 or 6 news. I don't have to sort through and sift through. It's 5 or 6 news stories that are relevant to where I am. And like you said, there's enough politics and national news out there. You can get that anywhere. But I love the hyper local. I think that was the first time I'd ever heard that term.
And we are hyper because if we go somewhere, we're live, we're Facebook living, we're taking shots and, taking pictures. When riding down the street the other day, I just stopped. I was like, oh, what is this? These strawberries are nice. They're just something beautiful to share. We try to share a lot of positive things. We do share government information and school board information. So, we share some of the serious stuff too. And we've gotten into some investigative aspects where we just dive in and really go deep in things like the Dunbar School, for example, because there were a lot of rumors about what happened, how it happened. And it took Cassandra about 6 stories. She really could have published more to really get through the history and the present. So that's what we do.
And I didn't really know much about the Dunbar School situation, but I really found those articles to be enlightening, and I appreciate you guys reporting on that. Jack Waters says hello. Patty Lovell says hello.
Patty Lovell, my teacher. Hey, Jack. And I can't see the chat, so are you on Facebook? Is that where everyone's saying hello?
It's showing up on my chat window, but I'll just let you know as they scroll in. Tonight we're here to talk about your book, Modern Media Relations for Nonprofits. But first, let's talk about media relations. You said you've been in the business over 20 years. How has journalism and public relations changed in the last 20 years?
Well, I feel like, it doesn't take necessarily a media expert to see some of these things, and I'm sure this has impacted you. We're looking at smaller newsrooms, or in some cases, non-existent newsrooms. Used to be able to call somebody and say, I have a story, and someone answered the phone. Well, good luck with that right now. There were beats. Remember a time where people had beats? There was an education beat, there was a nonprofit beat, there was a government beat. So it meant that reporters were well versed in an issue or a topic. And as we've disseminated assignments, that has really changed a lot, and it changes how reporting shows up. A lot of publications are using more freelancers. I became a freelancer, full-time freelancer in 2015. Before that, I had a nonprofit job, which is kind of how I came to this, combining these two interests. But when I became a full-time freelancer, I freelanced for 12 publications. And a lot of those folks were letting reporters go. So there's a huge, dump of full-time reporters. And then this request for multi-layered information. So I wasn't a photographer. I wasn't trained as a photographer. I was trained as a reporter. And the photojournalist had a very unique and different job. But now when I go on site, I'm the reporter, I'm the photographer, I'm the videographer, I'm the Facebook Liver, everything. So this request and this need to have multifacets, even in the broadcast world, for example, they call it B-roll in broadcast. So, it might be live at 6:00 and they want that interview, but they also want something unique for the website before or after. So there's a real pressure for that. And then you'll also notice that news is less local. There's a pressure to be more regional. It was the exact opposite when I got in the business. It was like, how much local? We start local, and then we might branch out to regional. And now news starts national or regional, and then people want to localize it. So it's very interesting how it's flipped, kind of turned on its ear. And then for a lot of you who've heard of things like fake news, there is a lack of trust in the media. And I can tell you now more than ever as a reporter, I have never been turned down for more stories in my life. It hurts my little reporter feelings when people say no, they don't want to do a story because they don't trust me to be fair, or they don't trust me to be accurate, which really means they don't know me. But basically, that is something that's very new to me as a reporter, and someone who is a trained professional who's learned to, in a column, I don't leave my politics aside, but when I'm writing a news story, I do leave my politics aside. And then the last thing is, I said all the negative stuff first, but for the consumer, the great news, and for the nonprofits, or even the politician or the educator, it is so easy to tell your story right now. Now more than ever. You don't need the middleman or the middlewoman anymore. And that, for someone in journalism, that's a little disheartening, but I also want to help facilitate that, because I feel like, there's some empowerment, and I'll talk about that later when we get to what great actually means. But there's some real empowerment in the fact that you can, if I say something wrong, you can contradict it. And it used to be you had to run a correction or get published, but now you have the ability to publish your own stories. And I think there's something beautiful about that.
Controlling your own narrative.
Absolutely.
But I think your book tells you how to do that properly, because that's not something that everybody knows or wants to do. In your book, you also offer advice on how to set goals, attract the right kind of attention from reporters, prepare staff for interviews, how to effectively promote events, and how to respond in crisis. Why is it important for nonprofits to have a game plan for disseminating information?
Thank you for asking that question. And thank you for reading, because I could, sometimes people interview me and I can tell they haven't read the book. You are good.
I read the book. Yes.
But I want to give props out here to, let's see if I can get my co-author in here, Peter Panepetto. So I have to say, Peter we were doing trainings for Nonprofit Marketing Guide, which is Kivy LaRue's company, Kivy LaRue Miller's company. And we had so much in common. I was planning on writing a book, but Peter and I had so much in common because Peter was the editor of the Chronicle of Philanthropy. And I came from a nonprofit ED background. and went and first I was in journalism, then nonprofit, then in journalism. And we just got together and we were like, we wish that nonprofits knew what we knew as journalists. And we wish that journalists knew how to reach nonprofits. So we kind of created this relationship book between the two that we were hoping that would really help bridge some of those gaps and some of the things we saw. Most of the folks in nonprofit work aren't trained in journalism, didn't go into the business because they wanted to be in the media or even deal with the media. So that was one of the reasons why we wrote the book. But part of what we realized is that, people set lots of goals when it comes to fundraising and development, and then often complain about why they don't have media coverage, but they don't have any goals in that area, or it's not something that you really sat down and said, hey, maybe it's an afterthought. I remember, we would get to a place in planning and a fundraiser, an event, and a board member would say, we should contact the newspaper. And I'm thinking, we should have thought about that before we started planning. And so this is really what we hope to help people to think about and to think through in a real quick way. All of the books, Bold and Bright Media, which also owns Davidson Local, is my book publishing company, and we publish quick guides. So our goal is for people in the field and in the profession to really be able to jump in there, check that, go through and say, okay, I really came away with some practical tips.
And it's a quick read too. It's not 400 pages and, takes you a semester to get through. I mean, you could sit down in an afternoon and it will give you a great guide on how to communicate your story. And I think that, nonprofits, I think you said in your book, they're busy doing the work, not the publicity, and that's, and I think probably the two personality types don't always intersect. You mentioned the GREAT strategy, GREAT, as a formula in your book. What does GREAT mean?
So Peter and I came up with GREAT. Everyone was talking about GREAT, and we thought we had some strategies. We started putting those together, and I realized that GREAT was an acronym for a lot of the strategies that we put together. So the first one I talked about, goal-oriented, starting with a media strategy and really tying things back to that media strategy. The second one is responsive. And that chapter talks about crisis communications. It also talks about this whole concept, and there it is, the GREAT. It also talks about the R for responsive, something that we call newsjacking, which is basically news hijacking. And it means that sometimes a topic could come up and it's not about your organization, but it's about what you do. So, for you, it could be, national reading, and it's a reading conversation that you say, okay, well, we're going to hop in here and hop on this national interest in reading and why this is important. And we've seen this happen with a lot of folks. So that's just being responsive to what's going on around you and being responsive to reporters. We talk a little bit about that because, we've had some experiences over the years where, we don't get phone calls back after people really beg us for coverage, and then we don't get phone calls back. The next thing is empowered. So there's a rumor, all press is good press, and I don't believe that to be true. All press is not good press. And there are times where I have had media coverage for the nonprofit that I didn't want to share because it pushed a stereotype. It was what I consider to be lazy journalism at times. All media isn't empowered, but the question is, how do you get there with a reporter? And that's kind of what we talk about. How do you get to this story that you both love? I can tell when a reporter really feels what they're writing about. I've been around there long enough to say that person really cared about that story. And I could tell when they didn't. And how can you really get that empowered coverage? That's one thing that we talk about. And then the next thing is tailored or targeted. The T is tailored or targeted. And so, I've taken over media lists that have nothing to do with the content. So, like, for example, being on a media list for the library, being on a media list for, a construction magazine might not be, they're probably not going to cover the library unless you've done something extraordinary in architecture or construction or solar. So just think about, who is the audience? I tell people, rather than have a media list of 60 people who never call you back, try to develop relationships with 10 targeted reporters who have an audience or even an interest in what you care about and you're concerned about. So make sure your audience is tailored and targeted. And then to talk about what's new, because modern media relations really hits on things that other books might not, like podcast. Podcasts are an amazing way. If you find a podcast about reading, for example, then, a local podcast about reading, then you should be all over it because that's your audience. Everyone tuning into that podcast cares about reading. And that's your audience. Or for you who you have a podcast or you have media, people should want to tune into you because they can connect with you, educators, other folks. So I'd really challenge people when they think about the media list to include bloggers and podcasters because they have a loyal audience, and podcasting is the blog of the future. So
I love podcasts. I've retired my radio and I either listen to audiobooks or podcasts in my car. But what are some other tools that those looking to boost their media presence should consider? You mentioned podcasts. What other tools or platforms could people use to relay their messages?
Well, I'll have to take it back to the old school way. In 95, when I started working in the world, my job was to check the fax machine, the old fax machine that took forever to click, 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 click up. That dates me. And to look at the topic and to deliver it to the right desk. So press releases were important, but I tell people I've been reading boring press releases for way too long. So I love press releases. There's a sizing report that happens every year with journalists, and they ask, what are the most important things for you to do your job or to cover a story? Hands down, they always say press releases. So people say, are press releases dead? Are they necessary? Absolutely. And the press release will give you two things. They'll alert the reporter to your story, but they also help, especially when you cut and paste in the body of an email. That's just how I like to get my stuff. And they'll help with accuracy. So, sometimes spelling is not a reporter's strong suit. Believe it or not, a lot of reporters are not great at spelling. And we're moving through things quickly and seeing names spelled differently, sometimes in the same story. I've spelled Murphy, 3 different times in a story, 3 different ways. But I think that the press release helps with accuracy. We can cut and paste. So we've got that date, we've got that time, and it just really helps out a lot. So I think that's the biggest thing. And the other thing is high resolution photos. So if you'll notice, if you go to davidsonlocal.com, we have a category called Contributed Community News. Every media source has this. This means that we ran your press release. In our situation, in our digital world, some media places can run a press release without photography, but because we solely are online, our system requires a photo. If you send us high resolution photos, we love you forever. We love you because on a slow news day, you are the answer to our lives, and we have to publish something every day. So be a part of that. And then the other thing is, I encourage people to have online newsrooms because I don't want to always have to bother you for information. If your bio's already on the online newsroom, then you don't have to give it to me. If your high resolution headshot is on the online newsroom, you don't have to give it to me. And if you have a website, it doesn't have to be anything sophisticated. A page will do. Just make sure you have downloadable files. And one of the most common frustrations I get from people whenever I want to do a story about them is they say, you can go to our Facebook page and get photos. Well, I could, but why wouldn't you send me something? Because number one, I really want something that maybe somebody doesn't have. And then number two, the resolution when you download from Facebook or any social media platform is not as high of a quality as what you need for, especially a digital publication. But when I worked in print, it was almost impossible to get the quality that you need for a print publication. So please do have photos to share with people, have them ready, have a file, have captions with people, and that'll really help kind of push your story forward. if you're ready to go, I'm ready to go. That's what I tell people all the time. I'm like, when I call people and they're like, oh, I have all that, I'll send it to you. And it shows up in my inbox maybe 10 minutes later. And I'm like,
Well, that's kind of how we connected. We had a conversation. You said, send me that in an email. And I went to my office and I sent it to you. And I appreciate that. What is, in your book, you mentioned a thought leader. What is a thought leader and how can nonprofits cultivate thought leadership?
So thought leadership is more about the topic versus the person in many ways. So, or even the organization. So, for example, I've worked with the North Carolina Bear Festival and really helped them with placement to become thought leaders in the area of bears in Eastern North Carolina, the Black Bear. And they have a museum. They also have a festival. But Tom Harrison, who's their executive director, is really known as a thought leader when it comes to the bear population in North Carolina. He's studied it, he's researched it, he's around it, he's indoctrinated, engulfed himself in it. And if there is an issue that comes up, even with issues with bears being hit on the highway, because that was a really big concern. It's a public health concern. And so people started from across the nation started to go to Tom and ask him about this information. In turn, they learned about the Black Bear Festival. So a thought leadership positioning might not seem like the immediate thing you want, like, hey, how is this helping us raise money? But it positions you in a place where people respect your organization, they respect you, and they know more about the topic that's in your mission. And isn't education, most of our missions anyway, we want to provide information and access to education. So a lot of people, I think, might see it as bragging or feel, nervous about putting themselves out there in that way. But it's really important for your organization. And news sources are always looking for the expert. So why not become that?
Okay, well, great. And I think thought leader is a new term for me as well. So I really have learned a lot from your book. Sometimes organizations struggle with self-promotion, marketing, and relaying messages to their stakeholders. What are some common situations that lend themselves to the outsourcing of media relations?
I think that, we have a section in the book about outsourcing and how to decide, when is that for you? And how to really sit down and have that conversation. Because I always opt for, are you sure you don't have anyone on your board, on your staff? Maybe it's not always the executive director. Maybe it's not always the manager. It could be someone else who, a lot of folks have communications folks. I always feel like communication feels better and is more natural when it comes from within the organization. But if you're small, if you have a campaign that's really big and, has a life of its own and you don't have the staffing for it, those are two scenarios. But I'll go back to the nonprofit because, in our world of nonprofit, we're really taught to be humble and gracious and thankful, and we are. But we also, I think, sometimes that whole concept of I'm not an expert, and I think someone said that to me. I worked in housing for a decade, and they said, and I had written grants for, millions at that point. And they said, well, if you're not an expert, we don't have one here. So, and I thought, why was I saying that? Why? Because, we are taught to, it's not about us. And you promoting your organization should never be about you. Very rarely do I see someone as a journalist that I go, oh, that person has just got so much ego in the nonprofit space. Now, I mean, politicians in the nonprofit space, not so much. So you probably don't come off the way that you feel, but it's so unnatural for us to want to say, hey, look at me, I have information to share. But it's not about you, it's about your mission. And the more people know you, the more people go to you, the more access you are having to folks who can help you accomplish your mission.
Okay. This book is a quick read and a great outline for nonprofits, small organizations, and I would think small businesses too. I would recommend Modern Media Relations for Nonprofits or any small group that's looking to up their PR game. How can listeners get a copy of the book? They can get a copy at the West Davidson Public Library. This is my personal copy, but we do have a copy that can be checked out. But how can listeners get a copy of their own?
The fastest way to do that is Amazon.com. If you need something wholesale, we sell through Ingram Spark. You can also go to Walmart or Barnes & Noble. I know BarnesandNoble.com. You can request copies to be sent. But the very fastest way to get access to it is to go to Amazon.com and look for Modern Media Relations for Nonprofits, and you'll see the book there. And they'll send it right to your house. They'll send it to you. They're great about that. They'll take a picture when it arrives. Until we get a local bookstore.
Until we get a local bookstore. Coming soon, hopefully, to a storefront near you is Pig City Books. And we will stock Modern Media Relations for Nonprofits as well as other local authors. I understand you've conducted professional development training in the past. If nonprofits were interested in learning more, how can they contact you?
They can contact me through the Davidson Local page. That's probably the fastest, because I have an alarm set to make sure the news goes out every morning at 7:05. So it's ak@davidsonlocal.com. And also, if you go to the Davidson Local page and you ever send a contact, I mean, I'm probably going to see it at some point, so don't say anything ugly about me. But if you go there, you can definitely get in contact with me. But my email address is ak@davidsonlocal.com. And you can also message me on any of the social media platforms. And I'll just encourage you to let you know if reporters are using their company on social, they're fair game to be contacted through direct messages like Twitter. I get a lot of media pitches through Twitter, especially when I worked on national stories. So definitely feel free to inbox me or message me. I'm not the person who would be frustrated by that. And the same token, I get a lot of contacts. Like, I'm looking for people. I don't know what I did before Facebook Messenger. I don't know, because I find story sources all the time.
And you almost don't need a phone number anymore because of Facebook Messenger. But I did drop your email in the comments, and we can always add other information or documents after we finish as we need. So Antoinette, what projects are you currently working on now?
I have been working for the past few years on research about missing and murdered Indigenous women in the eastern part of North Carolina.
Wow.
So that's been a really big research and reporting project that I've done some national reporting about. I like to kind of have those national projects. But other than Davidson Local, which keeps us really busy and really hyper, we put the hyper in hyper local. I really need to get that on the shirt. We put the hyper in hyper local, which I'm really enjoying and having fun with, and seeing all you folks and seeing people I haven't seen in years. And, it's almost like a reunion of sorts. And the community's response and reaction has been so much fun. That's probably one of my biggest projects, outside of just really loving to hop in on a research story and dig my heels in and follow it through to see that, in some cases that policies are created that protect people from, in particular, women and human trafficking, are really big concerns of mine.
Well, I do have a book rec for you, and I'll have to drop it in the comments later about stories of Indigenous women and violence against them. That it won a big award a couple years ago, and I've got a copy. I'll have to dig it out, and I'll send it to you.
Okay, please do share.
Oh, I will. This is all great information. And anything else that you would like to add before we finish up?
I wanted to say that social media is social, and for journalists, especially struggling in this market, that one of the biggest complaints that I hear from journalists, because I interviewed over 50 journalists for this book, and one of the biggest complaints was when we get finished. So there's pressure on us, especially for freelance and for someone else, to have the clicks, the likes, the share, the social activity. And when I was freelancing, before I even sent my writing sample, they would ask about my Twitter platform and other platforms. And so I just encourage nonprofits. One of the biggest things you can do to support journalists and support journalism is to like and click and share, even if it's not your story, but to be social with reporters. If you like a story that they wrote, I tell people all the time, if you want positive media, we'll have to convince advertisers that people care about things other than the obituary section and the cops. So the cops section of the paper. So people say that all the time, like, we're tired of that, we want positive stories. Well, if you want it, then you can have it.
Like and
But
share.
you have to justify it to advertisers, and liking and clicking and sharing equates to dollars in the news business. So I just encourage people. I've written stories about nonprofits that I thought were great promotional pieces for them. I mean, no one is really writing the gotcha nonprofit stories right now. And they didn't share them on their own social media. And so I would go back and say, did I get something wrong? Do I need to issue a correction? And they would say, oh, we just didn't get to it. Oh, we forgot. Oh, yeah, we saw that, but we didn't. You know what? And that really, I was like, okay, that's tough for people in this business, because advertisers are looking. The first question that I get is, how many people are clicking on a story? So if you like local news, if you like what Davidson Local's doing, if you like what any local source is doing, television, radio, anyone, please share their stuff. It's really important.
Okay, well, great, Antoinette. Thanks again for joining us today. And for folks listening, you can follow Antoinette on all the social media platforms, and you can contact her through email at ak@davidsonlocal.com. If you want a copy of Modern Media Relations for Nonprofits, you can check all your local bookstores, major booksellers, and of course, Amazon. And hopefully we'll have a bookstore in Lexington soon. So thanks again for joining us, and you take care.
Thanks for having me.